This is Attorney Gerald Griggs of Justicefighter.
I don't think they ready for you, Attorney Griggs.
Justicefighter. Hey guys, what's going on? It's Attorney Gerald Griggs of Justicefighter. We're here on Justicefighter podcast, and we have one of my favorite people in Georgia politics, Teresa Tomlinson, who's present. She's the former mayor of the city of Columbus, Georgia, and she's running for U.S. Senate. And I'm just excited to have her in the pod. Just wanted to talk to her. Introduce yourself to the people, Teresa.
Well, I'm glad to be on Justicefighter. Yes. Teresa Tomlinson, so glad to be here. Thank you, Gerald.
Anytime. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Georgia politics. Let's talk about what's going on. So you were the former mayor of Columbus. Tell us a little bit about Columbus, Georgia.
Well, it's 90 miles southwest of Atlanta. It's a really diverse, complex community. It's an African-American majority community. It's home of Aflac International Insurance. We have, of course, home to Fort Benning, which employs 40,000 people a day and has about 100,000 soldiers come in and out of there for training every year. So has that complexity also to the community, home to Columbus State University. And frankly, we just blew up the dams that used to clog up our river, and now we have whitewater rafting through downtown. So we got a little bit of everything going on.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so you were the mayor there for how long?
8 years, 2 terms.
2 terms. Mm-hmm. And now you're running for U.S. Senate.
That's right, to replace David Perdue.
And what motivated you to want to run for U.S. Senate?
You know, it's interesting. I was actually going to go back to the practice of law. I did a little bit like you did, except I was in the civil arena. Fought large corporations in the federal court system to get justice for people, usually in consumer fraud cases and things of that nature. And so I loved it. I had a great passion for it, a lot like you do, and was going to go back to that after being mayor. And I just saw what was going on. I knew that David Perdue was incredibly vulnerable. He's just a cold and remote personality. You know, some people really get into being around other people, and other people are just a little bit more reserved and remote. And that's why he doesn't have the town halls. And I mean, not only does he not have town halls, he doesn't even go to the Republican committee meetings. I mean, he just doesn't show up, you know. And particularly with the people that put him in office, those people that tend to be outside the metro Atlanta area. Those folks depend on feeling like they have a relationship with the people who are representing them. A lot of them come from smaller communities, and so previous holders of the office have taken the time to go to the local festivals and the community events, and he doesn't go to any of that. So I knew he was going to be vulnerable. And then, of course, the tariff wars on our own farmers. You know, agriculture is our number one industry here in Georgia. Farmer suicides have spiked. Farmer bankruptcies have spiked. It has devastated the communities in central and south Georgia that depend on the agricultural industry. And that's the breadbasket of his votes, frankly. So I knew he was going to be vulnerable. Of course, he wasn't serving the rest of Georgia well either with his assault on the Affordable Care Act, his assault on SNAP benefits. I mean, you can go on and on. The man doesn't care for the fact that government's a partner in our prosperity, and he's done everything he could to atrophy it. And as far as I was concerned, he was unfit to serve.
Okay. And so we met each other, and I was real intrigued by your platform and your just openness. You were reaching out to a lot of individuals to let them know that you were preparing to run, and it moved me a lot. And so my question to the viewers is, what do you think your platform will be, and why should people be engaged in the Teresa Tomlinson campaign for U.S. Senate?
You know, the first thing is that I'm here to make government work for the people. That sounds vague, but it's incredibly important, because a lot of times you have politicians in and they talk about, well, you know, I'm going to fix health care, and I'm going to fix this, I'm going to fix that. I want to get to that in just a second. But know this, that government's this amazing tool that resolves our challenges, you know, and if you don't know how to work that tool, if you don't believe in that tool, nothing good will happen. And so everything that I talk about, I have this paper on my website at teresatomlinson.com. I talk about reforming the civic and the financial infrastructure. We all know what infrastructure is. It's roads and bridges, right? What about the civic infrastructure? That's people's access to power. If you're participating in a mass incarceration system, you don't have access to power. If you can't get one person, one vote, you don't have access to power. If you were coming to this country seeking the freedoms, the city on the hill, and you're separated from your children, you don't have access to power. And so if you're a woman and you don't have the basic human right of bodily autonomy, if you're not a co-equal citizen, then you don't have power. And then you look at the financial aspect of it. If there's a wealth gap in this country, and we need to look at this. I don't know if you know this fact, Gerald, but on the day that the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, Black Americans owned 1% of the wealth of the country. Today, in 2020, Black Americans own 1.75% of the wealth of this country. Now, there is no way that has happened unless there is a systemic racial bias that runs through our tax system, our banking system, our housing system, and every other criminal justice system, every other system that you want to lay out there. And so when I talk about reforming the financial infrastructure of this country, I'm talking about access to prosperity. And so when I say government is a tool, that's an overarching umbrella where I'm talking about my job as your elected official is to make sure every citizen has access to power and every citizen has access to prosperity. And we can do that by correcting the systems.
I definitely agree with that. And so, we've been marching and protesting and trying to get accountability from our elected senator here. We had a conversation before we went on the air about the Women's March and how you were there, and of course I was there, and it was so engaging. And then I kind of told you after the Women's March, we had a series of attempts to meet with the elected senator, at that point, David Perdue and Johnny Isakson, but primarily David Perdue, and we went there for 17 straight weeks. And so my question, for transparency's sake, is if you are elected the U.S. Senator, will you meet with your constituency?
Well,
will you have town halls? Will you have office hours?
Well, let me tell you something that's so interesting. Yes, of course, is the answer, but let me prove to you by the record, okay? I just don't just talk the talk, I walk the talk too. So when I ran for mayor the first time in 2010, we were transitioning to a whole nother place in our community, and our power structure looked a lot like the 1970s, and so I ran on race, poverty, and blight. And everybody said, look, ain't no white woman need to be talking about race. We had 44 debates, and we would pack 100 people in those rooms at those debates and forums. And the reason why was because people were so hungry to hear about what the vision might look like. How in the world were we going to live in this new place and have this strong vision for our future? And so I realized people want to touch those that they're electing. They want to be there. They want to hear it. And so I promised, and I did, every quarter we had 75 minutes of open mic, live streamed, run on CCG TV, our public access channel. Radio station would broadcast it live. 75 minutes of open mic. You could come. We would meet at places where citizens wanted to meet, not where government likes to hold court. And we would go into community centers and restaurant community rooms and meet with these folks, and they could ask me anything. And we would have people there, department heads, to try and answer the questions. I had 30 of those in the 8 years. That's in addition to the neighborhood association meetings and the civic meetings and all the other groups that called and would ask the mayor to come, and I certainly would go. And so not only did we have the 44 debates and forums when I was running for office, the 30 town halls while I was in office, I ran 2 Facebook pages and 2 Twitter pages, and I answered those, either myself or if I was on a plane or so, my staff would answer for me. But people need access to their government. They do. It's essential. And so, yes, people will get that from me.
I definitely agree. And so it's been a very interesting last 3 years here in Georgia, especially around the issues of national politics, particularly in the office of Senator with David Perdue. What would be different under a Tomlinson administration as the duly elected U.S. Senator from this state?
Well, the biggest thing is David Perdue thinks government's about power, and I know it's about service. So right there, we start off on different places. David Perdue said that he was going to go to Washington, D.C., He was going to resolve the budget deficit. I don't know if you remember that, right?
Yeah.
And so now it's 3 times more than it would have been had he never shown up. But what he's chosen to do is to take the public's wealth, the taxes that we all pay through payroll taxes, whatever it might be, and he's transferred that to a very small group of people, of private citizens and private corporations, and through the tax cuts that he's done. And then he's atrophied our government. And so now we're hearing things about, oh, we got to cut some Medicare, we're going to cut Social Security, we got to cut SNAP benefits, we can't be having all this, and the thing is that all those things that he wants to replace, what he's missing is that our government is us, and our government's the framework in which we live our most prosperous life. And if you don't have those basic partnerships between government and the people that it's serving, then nothing functions correctly. You're not going to have the things that they love so dear, that economic growth and that GDP, when you're functioning government in the way that he is. The things that he sets a priority on does not put people first. It puts power and wealth first. And so what I would rather do is take a system that presently serves and favors the wealthy and the powerful and make it a system that provides access to wealth and power for all people. And that's the fundamental thing. And from that, then you find, health care, right? We can provide universal health care. You see, I've used government as a tool to make it serve the citizens. And so I know that we can build on Obamacare. We can take it to a place where every single citizen has access to cradle to grave, meaningful health care. We can do that. Expanding Medicare. We can have the federal government take over Medicaid so no state can veto the access of their citizens to get Medicaid if they're at 138% or less of the poverty level. And we're sitting here wringing our hands. And that's because we don't have leadership.
Yeah, and so, being as involved in politics as I have for the last 3-4 years, I've seen a lot around these issues. But I guess my question is, once you get in there, how do you think you're going to be able to get things done in the U.S. Senate, considering that there is a Republican majority right now? How would you work to push for universal health care,
right,
or strengthening Obamacare? How would you push for criminal justice reform when you go into a House or deliberative body where you're in the minority?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I don't plan on being in the minority because I'm going to work to make sure that my flipping of David Perdue's seat is actually the one that ends up sending Mitch McConnell home, we hope, but at the very least into the minority leader's position. But I get your question. It's an important one. How do you function when you're in the minority? Let me say something. There's a lot of people use different political tools, and I think one of the big mistakes of people that get into public office is you think, wow, I'm all that in a bag of chips. All these people voted for me. I'm just the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I'm going to come up with these great ideas. I'm just going to pontificate on them, and everybody's going to come running to my personal charisma and do what I want to do. And let me just tell you, politics don't work like that, you see. And so what you have to do is you have to find the way that what you're doing butters their bread. Stay with my bread analogy here for a minute, you see. And so what I did when I was in Columbus, on some of the most controversial things that we did, I was able to get unanimous support. I didn't get unanimous support because the 10 city councilors thought I was the greatest thing in the whole world. I didn't get it because they wanted to do what I wanted to do. We had to work it. And by that I meant there were some folks that I thought, well, that person's never going to be with us. They're never going to come over and support this. And so what I did was reach out to people that I knew that elected official trusted and admired. And I spoke with them about what that elected official should like about this proposal, what I thought it got them or their district, the benefit of it. And I let that person be the honest broker that took the message, not, hey, the mayor wants you to do this. And so the point of the story is sometimes you have to work it to lift up the people that are your opponents so that they can see what's in it for them. And you know, what's interesting about this, and there's a couple of real cynical examples I've got to float. But you know, for a while, this whole nation was incarcerating people for minor amounts of marijuana until some older white men figured out they could make a hell of a lot of money off of it, you see. Mm-hmm. Now, all of a sudden, they're very, very interested in decriminalizing marijuana.
Yeah, because it's a new cash crop.
Some customers. They need some customers. And so now all of a sudden you got this very cynical political coalition. It happens to work out for everybody. Mm-hmm. We give people clemency, let them out of prison, finally clear up their records, expunge their records. And if some folks want to make money, fine, but we're going to have to allow that money to be open to everybody, even the people that have been put in prison for it previously. But that's a classic example of finding a way of how that issue works for more people. Criminal justice. You know, there was a reason why Nathan Deal supported criminal justice reform. It's because he didn't want to have that tax base raise those taxes to support these mammoth prisons they had, right?
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, his profit motive meets morality. And so sometimes you just have to find, Democrats tend to speak in moral imperatives, being your brother's keeper. Mm-hmm. See, I believe in that, so it's natural fit to me. Republicans tend to speak in perceived, not always accurate, but perceived economic realities or economic terms. And so if you can find a way to speak with those people who seem to oppose you about an economic reality or justification for this moral imperative you want to do, then you'd be surprised you actually can bring them around.
Okay. And so, you know, I would be remiss in my duties as a justice fighter if I didn't ask you this question. You know, in Georgia, African Americans about, 33%? 32% of the population. But they are the Democratic base.
Yes.
And so, you know, what policies and legislation do you propose that you can get passed at the U.S. Senate level to effectively affect the lives of African Americans?
Right.
Because that's a major conversation that's happening in the African American community around voting.
Yeah. Well, it fits back into what I was saying before about the adjustment to the civic and to the financial infrastructure. And so first it starts with things like minimum wage. We've got to take the minimum wage to $15 an hour, but what we also have to do is put a cost of living adjustment on it so that we never get this far behind. I talk extensively about criminal justice reform because I've participated in it. I actually took over the leadership of the prison there in Columbus, Georgia, and converted a state work camp to a job rehabilitation and training center.
Talk a little bit more about that, because I know there was a question that occurred online about prison labor and some other stuff. I want you to talk more about that.
Thank you. No, what happened was it was actually the complete opposite. What had happened online is some folks had found some article that quoted a small snippet of an hour-long conversation that I had engaged in. There were two things that I did when I came into Columbus, Georgia. When I walked in, Columbus had the largest work camp in the state. That's a state-run prison. It's an old leftover adage from the early 20th century, basically. They turn out prisoners to work on public lands. It's not like the for-profit prisons, but still they mow the grass and they paint the halls of public buildings and things of that nature. Well, because we had this work camp, Columbus, Georgia was saving $19 million a year. And so when I came in, I said two things. First of all, this is going to end either because a court throws this stuff out or because of the political will is going to force the state to stop this. And when that happens, we're going to be $19 million short. So I raised the garbage rate, proposed some changes to our tax system so that we could begin breaking ourselves off the addiction of the work camp. So that was one part. It was a very hard conversation because you get elected and you start talking about raising people's garbage rates and changing the tax structure so that you can have a city that can sustain itself when the free labor goes away. So that was actually the snippet that they took where I was talking about $19 million, and they just stopped when I said, and we have to break ourselves from that human subsidy, and actually showing that that's exactly what I did. I took the very hard steps to do that. But the day to day, and what was really exciting, I've written an article about this for the Daily Cost, which shows that we can change, not just in Muskogee County, not just in Georgia, but frankly across the country. We can, first of all, we got to get rid of private prisons. But to the extent that public prisons are using this prison labor, this is how we changed it in Columbus. First of all, I got rid of the prior leadership, got in new leadership, established a really robust GED program where we graduated the most GED recipients of any prison in the state of Georgia, and work camp in the state of Georgia. Started soft skills training. Hundreds of prisoners went through that. Then we created a joint program through the Crime Prevention Office with Columbus Technical College, which provided that as the prisoners were working under the tutelage of licensed carpenters, electricians, or plumbers, they received certificates of apprenticeship so that when they got out, they had something they could take around to get a job. Then I banned the box, and we started hiring our own prisoners when they got out for the jobs that they had been doing for us while they were in prison. They were the best and most qualified, most experienced to do it. And then we also instituted something called the Rapid Resolution Program, where we hired more public defenders who could come in and assess very quickly. We hired a new district attorney and 3 new public defenders, and dedicated them to rapid resolution, where when these folks get in on nonviolent felonies, we can immediately assess their case, give them their options if they're going to have to go to trial or choose to go to trial. Then we would let them out without these cash bonds that would keep them in, and so they could get back to their families, back to work, go through the justice system, and not disrupt their life so profoundly. And that actually reduced the prison population dramatically, and of course provided more justice. So meaningful, both prison and jail reform. The jail reform, of course, was in conjunction with a wonderful sheriff who's one of, I think, only 3 female sheriffs in the state.
So basically, you ended cash bonds. You made rapid resources for public defenders available to evaluate cases, and of course, you ended the prison labor.
Right, converted it. Yeah. Well, the prison, I want to be careful because the prison labor is a state thing.
Yeah, I know. But
so, I mean, unless I went and took over Nathan Deal's office, I wasn't going to overthrow the prison.
Of course
but,
not.
But what I did was replaced the prison leadership and converted the programs as we implemented them, so they became job training facilities and rehabilitation facilities.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so another important question I think that our listeners want to know, of course, we mainly hit North Georgia, Metro Atlanta, but we want to know, how do you feel about this statewide race being able to turn Georgia blue? Because, of course, most of North Georgia is blue, and some of Middle Georgia is blue, but we have South Georgia. So, yeah. I mean, what do you think your odds are, and where do you see the race going as far as turning Georgia blue?
Well, first of all, I genuinely believe that I'm the only candidate running the field in the primary who can beat David Perdue. And the reason why is if you're going to run somebody who's going to defeat an incumbent, you have to have won hard-fought elections. You have to have that kind of strategic mind and experience of actually winning elections. And I have won both the elections very heatedly contested with well over 60% of the vote. But then you have to have governed and governed well, or it's hard to defeat an incumbent because they'll wrap themselves in their record, however bad that record may be. And you have to have somebody who can stand on the stage and say, sir, I know what good government looks like because I've delivered it for the people I've served, and you have failed us. So I'm the only candidate that can do that. But you're getting to the strategy of it, and there's basically 3 tiers in Georgia. There will soon be a day where those who are outside of Atlanta won't even need to show up and vote. I mean, it'd just be all Atlanta. Y'all just show up and vote, and Atlanta's going to have enough Democratic votes. That's all we're going to need. Well, that's 2030, you see. So I ain't waiting till 2030. And so in the meantime, we know from the 2008 Stacey Abrams election, where she came within 55,000 votes of being the first African-American woman governor in the United States of America, amid a sea of suppression, 55,000 votes. We know we have to, in Atlanta, where I was born and raised, went to law school, practiced law in Atlanta, maintained these important political relationships for some 30 years that are here in Atlanta, that we're going to turn out the Atlanta vote. That's why we have these amazing endorsers that are influencers in all different ways out there working to make this happen. So we're going to crank out the vote in Atlanta. But here's what I can do that none of the other candidates running can do. We have 50 counties in central Georgia, and those counties are by and large between 40 and 60% African American majority counties. All of those counties should be Democratic counties. Right now, only 25 of the 50 vote Democratic. Most of them stay home. They're registered. They vote for county commission, sheriff, and all that. They just don't vote in these statewide elections. They don't feel like Democrats field candidates that really speak to their life. The last candidate Democrats ran statewide that came from these areas that I'm talking about was Sam Nunn. That's how long ago it was. And so, Columbus, Georgia is in central Georgia. Mm-hmm. And so they know the mayor of Columbus, Georgia. They know the transition, the miraculous transition that we have made in that city. And so we have been working for the last 9 months to go get our voters there. We're talking about 30,000 votes. So when you have 55,000 votes between Stacey Abrams and Kemp, we're going to come into Atlanta with the growth that we've experienced these 2 years, the increase in voter registration. And we have had some, thanks to the automatic registration effort here now in Georgia. And many people out there working to register voters. There could be 500,000, 550,000 new voters. Now, not all those are going to vote. We got to get them to the polls. But some number will. So we're going to have some growth in Atlanta. But we're going to go get our 30,000 voters in central Georgia that just sit at home. It could be even more than that. That's the low range estimate. And so that's what this campaign is about. Now in South Georgia, look, those are some ruby red counties down there. Those are 80% Republican counties. And I'm not going to be chasing people around in MAGA hats. So, but we can show them some love and respect. Show them that I know what good, I come from a long line, 7 generations of sharecroppers, dirt farmers, and agricultural day laborers. I'm the first generation born in the middle class. And so I know how government touches their lives, and we can shave some margins down there. So, we shave 3, 4, 5% in South Georgia and some of those counties. David Perdue can't win this race.
And that's what I appreciate. I appreciate the broad-based coalition that you're trying to put together, because you just said you're 7 generation George, and I'm 5 generation. And so we had sharecroppers and slaves. But I think that what it's going to take to build a new Georgia is the realization of what one of the greatest Georgians to ever live said. We got to build that beloved community. And I think it's when, white people and black people realize that this is an economic issue that can raise the waves of all people. I think we can have a real conversation. And I think that's what's missing on the Republican side. I think they fail to realize that on the far right, there are the remnants of the Jim Crow South. And we have to remove that. We're in 2020. And so I guess what I want to see if you can leave with our listeners is, what is it that motivates black people to show up on a Saturday at Pascal's 250 deep to dance and have a good time and talk about the Tomlinson administration and talk about your candidacy? What is it that energizes the base to be there for you, that you think?
I think it is a genuine authenticity and a genuine respect for all human beings and their journey. I mean, they're all different. And we can't say, hey, brother, I get where you've come from. I don't know, but I can respect it, and honor it. And I think that I've always demonstrated that, and the genuine projection that I'm here to be used as your tool to make government work for you. I really see myself as this public servant to make it happen. And I think that authenticity, people connect with that, and they're hungry for that. And I think that just sort of the connection of that spirit is something that you're seeing in these amazing meet and greets and rallies that we're having, where we're turning out, over 100 people every time we get together. It's amazing out there.
And so I'm happy to hear that. And I'm happy to be one of your supporters. I signed on very early on as an endorser. But I want you to talk about some of the other people that have come around in your camp and that are now full-fledged Tomlinson supporters and getting this word out.
Yeah. Well, Joe Beasley, the great human rights
Awesome,
activist.
Joe Beasley.
Awesome. Of course, the great Andrew Young and his wife, Carolyn, Hank and Billy Aaron. Then, of course, we've had Max Cleland, who was the last Democratic senator to hold this seat, said that I was the only candidate that could be ready on day one. Former Governor Roy Barnes. And I appreciate all that, but I want to talk about some of the young folks, too. I mean, like yourself, We have Kiana Jackson in Albany, who is 21, 22 years old, who pushes thousands of people to the polls. She's just this young woman. It's just this dynamite personality who knows government's important. And then we have, Francis Johnson from Statesboro, former NAACP president. We've got a former ambassador, just folks that know government because they've been in it, and folks that have never been in government but know how important it is. And so we now have 40-something endorsers. We've got a big, I almost just let one out, this big surprise coming next week. Stay tuned. I think it's Thursday. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned for the next endorser.
Yeah, the next endorser. So, but we had Leah Sears, who was the first African-American Chief Justice of a Supreme Court, State Supreme Court, was one of the endorsers. So if you go to our website, teresatomlinson.com/endorsements, and just check it out, see the Iraq veteran, who's lost both legs in service to this country, and why he's supporting. That's what we do. We don't just list your name. We tell who you are and why this matters to you.
Yeah, and we really appreciate you coming in to Justicefighter podcast. Just want to give you the last 5 minutes to or however long you want to take to wrap up your candidacy and why people should get engaged and go to teresatomlinson.com and just what you see as the new vision for Georgia politics.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I know that everyone out there knows that this is such an incredibly important time. We've had race and bigotry used as a weapon and wedge against us for what I hope will be the last time. I know that's probably not possible somehow, but we can hope. And I know when we have people in the highest offices utilizing those types of weapons, I know the country's on the wrong path. And we have somebody like David Perdue that's enabling it, sitting right there next to the president when he says, we don't need people from those S-hole countries coming in from Africa and Haiti. We need more Nordic immigrants. We all know what that means. And David Perdue sat there and denied he heard it, denied he remembered it. We don't need that kind of cowardice. And so I'm here to offer a new way. Somebody with integrity, somebody with the experience of having made the justice system work for those who would have been left behind, someone who's made government work for the people I served in Columbus, Georgia, and someone who has a strategy to not just win this one election, but it will change the electoral template of the state. When we go and turn out Atlanta like I know we can do and we have done before, when we go and get our voters in Central Georgia, when we shave those voters in South Georgia, we will change the electoral map and reestablish a Democratic majority in the state of Georgia indefinitely into the future. And that changes the electoral map of the United States. That affects the presidential election. And so, Gerald, that's just how important this race is. And the reason why I feel this is a particular moment in time and my candidacy happens to fit this unique political profile is because I really feel we can bring together those proud democratic philosophies of the urbanized Atlanta area and metro Atlanta area and of the rest of Georgia and finally be the democratic state that we've been, frankly, for a couple of years. And nobody knows. And I'll tell you, the Republicans don't see us coming.
Yeah, they don't. And I just appreciate you stopping in. Of course, the doors of Justicefighter podcast are always open, however we can help. And I just appreciate the energy and the dedication you have to the fine people of this state. I look forward to the election. When is the election?
It is May 19th. And I mean, you got to circle that on the calendar because there's going to be a lot of confusion in the spring. But May 19th.
Yeah, so May 19th, make sure you're apprised of what's happening. And then once we get her through the primary, make sure that we go back to the polls in November and make sure that we turn this state blue. So I'm excited. Again, the podcast is always open. And thank you again to Teresa Tomlinson for stepping into Justicefighter podcast here on Justice Media. So again, thank you, Ms. Tomlinson, for coming in to Justice Media on the Justicefighter podcast. Thank you.
This is Attorney Gerald Griggs of Justicefighter.
I don't think they ready for you, Attorney Griggs.
Justicefighter.